boss of a big company needed to call one of his employees about an urgent problem with one of the main computers. Oh, it feels like me some days. We trialed the employee's, he dialed the employee's home phone number and was greeted with a child's whisper, "Hello." Feeling put out by the inconvenience of having to talk to a young child, the boss asked, "Hey, is your dad home?" Yes, whispered the small voice back to him. "Well, may I talk to him?" the man asked. To the surprise of the boss, the small voice whispered, "No." Wanted to talk with an adult because he was tired of talking with a child and getting nowhere. He asked, "Well, if your dad is unavailable, is your mom there?" "Yes," came the answer. "Well, may I talk with her?" the man replied. Again, the small voice whispered, "No." Knowing that this was not like the young child who would be left alone, the boss decided that he would just leave a message with the person who could, of course, write it out and make sure another adult got the message. And so he said, "Well, is there anyone there besides you?" the boss asked. "Yes," whispered the child, "a policeman." Wondering what a cop would be doing there at his employee's home, the boss said, well, can I talk to the policeman?" "No, he's busy," whispered the child. "What? Busy doing what?" the boss asked, growing a little more agitated and flustered. "He's talking to Daddy and Mommy and the firemen." Growing very concerned, the boss was more worried than he's ever been, and this wasn't even his child. He was worried not only at the fact that child said there was a policeman and a fireman, but he heard what sounded like a helicopter through the earpiece on the phone. And he goes, "What's that noise?" "A helicopter," whispered the voice. What is going on there?" The boss is more alarmed now than anything else. And in odd whispering voice, the child answered, "The search team just landed the helicopter." Alarmed, concerned, and more than just frustrated, the boss, he asked, "Well, why are they there?" And still whispering, the young voice replied, and with a giggle, "They're looking for me." Stories, right? Stories grab our attention. Stories grab illustration, right? They illustrate a point. They make us perk up a little bit because maybe we can relate to the story. Life is absolutely filled with stories, right? Stories start at a young age, right? We start to read to our kids. Well, even before we have kids, we're sometimes reading. We were told when Elisa was pregnant with Liam, we were told that you should talk to the belly. You should talk to your wife's belly so that your kid inside can hear your voice and they would recognize your voice when they come out. And so being the weird person I am, I have no idea how to talk to a belly. Like, what do you talk to a kid about in a belly going, "Hey, I'm your dad." It's really weird. So then instead of, just talking and being awkward about it, I would read a story because it was printed before me. It made sense. They could hear the different tones in my voice. And so that's what I would read. But right, of course, stories didn't end there. As my kids grew older, they loved stories. Like even right now, Oliver, his bedtime routine includes a story. And so he would pick, right now is the Berenstain Bears, and we have lots of different books by them, and he would pick one, and we would read it together. And then we would pray, and then we would end the day like that. But as you get older, right, the stories get a little bit bigger. Liam, for example, is not really into Berenstain Bears, but he's into chapter books, no longer pictures, right? And so as you get older, the pictures get less and the words get longer. Well, sometimes you like that because your imagination works. Other people who have to read it forcefully, like a high school student, may not enjoy it as much. But as you become an adult, you kind of appreciate stories like that because you kind of live into a fantasy of the story that you're reading and you enjoy it because, well, maybe we can't afford to go to Italy, but I can read about it. And you get excited for it. Stories, right? Stories are great. But stories are not only in books, right? Many of you guys have stories that you tell. Key stories sometimes, when you go to visit someone, you're like, this is a story I want to tell them. Or you have a backup story when you're having a conversation that gets really awkward and silent. So you're like, well, I'm going to tell you a story about what happened to me, 2 years ago to kind of break the ice. Stories, they're a part of our life. When we look at the Bible, we sometimes think stories, right? We think the Bible is full of different stories. Because if you were asked to someone, well, what's in the Bible? Well, many people would say stories are in the Bible. Or maybe you have a different response. Well, it has 66 different books in it. Well, what do those books within the Bible have? They have stories. Books that have chapters and verses that speak life and history. Sounds kind of like a story. Or parables, right? Jesus told stories, right? Stories of what God has been doing. The list can go on and on. But I want to dive into this new series called More Than Just a Story. And I want to dig into the historical context of these different quote-unquote stories that we'll read in the Bible. But to talk to you about it, I want to talk to more than just a story. And so I titled this More Than Just a Story because it was an event. The Bible is full of events, but sometimes we just see it as a story. It happened in the Bible, it's a story, but we don't necessarily see it as an event. When we change our thinking from a story to an event, the event becomes real because it happened. And so we're going to start digging into different parts of the Bible that these are events, not just stories that happened. And hopefully it would transform your thinking and be able to picture things a little more, I don't want to say seriously, but a little more maybe differently than you normally have. It wasn't just someone writing words on a page for you to necessarily just enjoy, even though you could, but it was written as an event to show that God did something great, whether it's him or through other people. Because God used real people in real life to accomplish great things. And so this series is not meant to replace faith, okay? Because a lot of people say, I need to see the evidence before I have faith. That's kind of the opposite of faith, right? Faith is believing what you cannot see. But this kind of actually should encourage you in your faith in Christ. Because when we have faith in Jesus, our faith produces works. And these stories, these events that I'm going to tell you, is people's faith producing works that honor God. And so we can glean from this series that the Bible, yes, is a grand story, but is filled with very real events. And so I want to take you through the first character. I don't know what the King, there, cool, King Hezekiah. How many of you guys have ever read King Hezekiah? He's a very short section, not a super short, but he's only about 2 to 3 chapters in the Bible itself. But his name was King Hezekiah. Why was he a king? Well, not only was he placed in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, he was a famous king. Well, maybe not as famous as King Arthur, you might say, but he was very important. 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 6 to 7. This is what it says. Because King Hezekiah put God first in everything he did, God prospered him. Hezekiah held fast to the Lord and did not stop following him. He kept the commands the Lord had given Moses, and the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook. That was paraphrased. Let me read this for you. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, being God, but kept the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses, and the Lord was with him. Wherever he went, he prospered. He rebelled against the king of Assyria, and he would not serve him. Quite a summary of someone's life. He was a king that made God his priority. He broke down the idols and altars that people were worshiping instead of God. We've talked about idolization in previous sermons before. And idolization is anything that you put before God. And Israel, unfortunately, was led by pretty bad kings. Kings that said, well, it seemed to work for other nations. Let's follow them. Let's build these altars that are not of God. Hezekiah said that's not happening. So he destroys these places of worship. He destroys these idols. It even goes as far to say as he destroys the bronze snake that Moses crafted in the desert. In Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 to 9, the people were getting bit by snakes. It's not there. They were getting bit by snakes. And so to heal them from these bites, God told Moses to erect a bronze snake, and if they looked at it, they'd be healed. The people didn't see that as God anymore healing them. They saw it as this bronze snake set up on a stick that was healing them. It's interesting that if you guys look at the American health system, what is their symbol? It's a snake, right? But anyways, apart from that, people turned that into an idol. And God was like, that's not the point. Hezekiah said, that's not the point, and he destroyed it. And so, why do we talk about Hezekiah in 2 Kings? Well, obviously he was important, but sometimes we only read him as a story, right? If you guys ever read of King Arthur, is there evidence that King Arthur was real? I mean, maybe you guys have never talked about King Arthur, but there's not a huge amount of evidence that King Arthur is real, but the story, the lore behind it is amazing. People are like, I love the idea of the Knights of the Round Table. I like the idea of Excalibur. And he took Excalibur and he became king and he conquered the people and he made Great Britain amazing. Did Hezekiah do this? Well, you don't really have Excalibur, but you have God moving. And I want to show you guys, there's some evidence that Hezekiah was real. This next slide here, Hezekiah's Bula. You guys are like, what is that? I mean, it sounds kind of ridiculous what it might be. A bula is an ancient Near Eastern clay seal for authenticating documents or goods. A royal seal, if you may. I mean, people were doing this up to like 200 years ago. They pour wax down, push their ring into it, and it would seal. And you know that the seal was broken, of course, if it was cracked or anything. But they found it. So if you want to go to the next slide here, they found one of Hezekiah's bula. And they were excavating in 2015, I believe. They were doing excavation at Ophel, and this thing measures, honestly, not very big, over 1 centimeter in diameter. It's not a very big seal, but it depicts a two-winged sun disk flanked by ancient symbols and containing Hebrew inscription that says, belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. That seal itself just totally told people what the Bible already said. We knew, if you read before Hezekiah, the king before him was his dad, Ahaz. Ahaz was one of the worst kings ever in the land of Judah there. So we have this kind of proof that, okay, Hezekiah was an important person if you had a seal. It proves that he was a real king. So now all of a sudden, it's not just a story. This is an event. This was a real person. The next slide, sorry. Sennacherib's prism. If you guys don't know who Sennacherib is, he was the king of Assyria that was conquering the land of the time of Judah and Israel. And he actually takes Israel, the section of Israel, captive. He leads them away, and he goes, I'm going to come back. I'm going to take Judah. I'm going to make sure that they're all conquered. And so we have this Sennacherib's prism. If you go to the next one, you can actually find it. And it's just an inscription of his kind of life, his conquests, his journeys. And Sennacherib, it's really, you say it so many times. He has a conquest against Judah, and the inscription boasts that King Hezekiah was trapped like a caged bird, confirming that Jerusalem was in fact under siege by the Assyrians. And then it goes on to list a tribute list that Hezekiah had to pay to not see Jerusalem laid to rubble. So it includes a list of gold, silver, treasures, which parallel the biblical account of 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 14 to 16. I don't think it's there. Okay, sweet. And so Hezekiah says, and Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear. And the king of Assyria required of Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver, 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house. At that time, Hezekiah stripped the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord, and from the doorpost that Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, had gave it to the king of Assyria. So it lines up with both accounts. The biblical account saying that Hezekiah gave, he's like, I got to save Jerusalem. I got to save my people. So he took all the gold, everything that he could find, and he gave it to Sennacherib. And in this prism, Sennacherib says, yep, he sure did give it to me, but we also laid siege to him at the same time. That we were going to wait them out, destroy their city. And so you have this story of a king who technically, we're going to read on, technically lost. But he wrote about it, right? The victors write history. So he wrote the good parts of his attack on Judah. And he goes, yeah, Hezekiah was a really wimpy king who we trapped his city like a caged bird, and then he gave us money, and then we still wanted to kill him. But it lines up. There's two different accounts. You can't just say the Bible doesn't count if you have an inscription from a different enemy. So Hezekiah is not just a story, he's an event. And so we have another piece of I guess you could say, archaeological evidence. We have the Siloam Tunnel and the inscriptions on the tunnel. Now, if you guys have never heard about this tunnel before, 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse 20 says, "This same Hezekiah closed the upper outlet of the waters of the Gihon and directed them down to the west side of the city of David, and Hezekiah prospered in all of his works." Being under siege by the Assyrians, they were pretty much a siege starves you out until you give up. Right? So they're cutting off their water, they're cutting off their food supply. And so Hezekiah's like, we got to do something else. And so he commissioned teams to go to the Gihon Springs, the water source, and to direct it and then dig a tunnel underneath the city to bring water to a pool so that people would have fresh water. And so he had two teams on opposite ends. This is quite amazing work if you ever read about it, because I think the French and the British did this years ago, where they dug under, I think, the channel, and they both started on one side and they met in the middle, is what they did. This is the same kind of idea, but they didn't have technology like radar or ground penetrating radar or anything. These two teams started digging from one end and the other end, and they were digging till they met in the middle. And the inscription on it in the tunnel is that one team goes, "We were digging and we could hear the other team. We could hear the other people digging until we broke through and we met each other." And so this is a picture of it. You can go to Israel today and you can walk through this tunnel, and water is still pouring through it. But the length of the tunnel was 1,750 feet of digging through. Hezekiah did this to save his people. And so we have proof of this tunnel and proof of the inscription on the walls of that tunnel. Hezekiah was not just a story, it was an event. So now at this point, you're probably wondering, what does this sermon have to do with anything? Are you just boasting about Hezekiah? Like, where's the Lord in all of this? Hezekiah was faithful to the Lord, and we start to get into this story as we go on. But I'm trying to give you evidence that what we read in 2 Kings is an event. And if we start viewing these things as an event, we start to see that if God worked in this event, he can work in the event that we're going through. So we can conclude together that Hezekiah is an event, right? Not just a story. It's an event. So then if we conclude that, Isaiah chapter 37, verses 10 to 13 says this: "Thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Do not let your God..." This is Sennacherib talking to Hezekiah, by the way. He says, "Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given to the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, devoting them to destruction. And shall you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them of the others? The nations that my father destroyed, the Gozan, the Haran, Rezeph, and the people of Eden who were in Telassar. Where is the kings of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of the city of Sepharvaim, the king of Hena, or the king of Ivai?" So Sennacherib's going, their gods saved them not. Where are they today? Utterly destroyed. There is no proof of them anymore. We wiped them out. Who says that you, King Hezekiah, will avoid the destruction the same as them? You guys want to know what Hezekiah's response to this was? It wasn't to rebuttal. It wasn't to go, do your best. Let's see what happens. That was not his response. His response was Hezekiah got on his knees and he prayed. Hezekiah barely had an army to stand against Assyria. They were being starved. They'd given all of their money to Sennacherib already. Who could they pay to help defend them? God was the only one who could do anything. And so Hezekiah went with the prophet Isaiah, and they sought the Lord together. You guys want to know what happened when he prayed? God responded. And I love it. Because when we pray, we want God to respond. Now, not always is God going to respond like this. I'm going to read you how he responded. But God does respond. And it could be in many different ways that he responds. It could be that he brings peace to you. Because sometimes when we pray, we're so filled with anxiety, we're so filled with fear, we're so feared with what's going to happen, how am I going to get through this? We're filled with doubt, right? But when we get before the throne of God, when we bend our knees, when we go before him, there's suddenly an overwhelming peace. There's a calmness. There's something that comes inside of us that goes, it's going to be okay. You're going to make it through. It may not be how you expect, but you're going to make it through. So God responded to Hezekiah's prayer. And this is what God said to Hezekiah in Isaiah 37, verses 33 to 35. It says, "Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city or shoot an arrow there or come before it with a shield or cast up a siege mound against it. By the way that he came, by the same he shall return. And he shall not come into the city, declares the Lord, for I will defend the city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David." God did not tell Hezekiah how he would do it. And I wonder if Hezekiah wanted to know that. I wonder if God or Hezekiah would be like, "Lord, just tell me how you're going to do it. How can I help? How can I jump in? I got some swords. I got some shields. I can throw rocks. I can do whatever you want. How can I be of help?" But God just tells him, Sennacherib came this way. He's going to go back the way he came. Your city will not be destroyed. So there is comfort to that. There's comfort to that. You have no idea how God's going to do it, but he says, "I will." And I think that's the hope sometimes we need to hear in our hearts. That we don't know how God is going to move in our life. We don't know how God is going to help us in our circumstance right now, but we know that he will. In 701 BCE, the biblical account of 2 Kings chapter 19:35 gives an account of what God did. It sounds pretty crazy. This is what God did. It says, "And that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies." Sounds crazy, right? That maybe we don't expect God to do something that nuts. But Sennacherib had his whole power in his army. He thought no one could touch him. And he wakes up one morning and he's missing 185,000 of his own troops. Time to tuck your tail in and run, hey? Yeah. Sennacherib very much indeed tucks his tail in and he runs. Isaiah backs up this account in Isaiah 37, verse 36. I'm not sure if I have all of this. It says, "The angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 people in the camp of the Assyrians, and when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies." Now, the cool thing is that they found evidence of a mass abandonment, if you will. They found an area where it kind of lines up, where Assyrians would camp out, where they would lay siege to Jerusalem. They found evidence that they left in a big hurry. They found evidence of items being left that you normally wouldn't leave. But they found evidence that something big happened. And that something big was this. So, if we understand, I'm going to say this again, if we understand that the story of King Hezekiah is not just a story but an event, then we believe that the event, what God did here, was real, not just a story. So, what does that mean for us? What is the whole point of me talking about this series of not just a story? If we have evidence of a slight timeline of King Hezekiah, then we can have faith and know that God showed up supernaturally to help Hezekiah in his time of need. And it forced a great king back to Assyria. And I don't want to say funny thing is, Sennacherib didn't live long after that. He got ambushed at his own palace back in Nineveh, and Assyria eventually, very shortly after, got conquered by the Babylonians. Kind of got his comeuppance, right? But what does it mean for us? If we understand that this really happened, that this was an event, then we understand that God showed up in Hezekiah's need. Because Hezekiah got on his knees and he prayed and said, I cannot do this on my own. I cannot do this anymore. I have nothing left to offer. All I have is you, God. If we understand that God showed up in a huge way and that was a real event, then I believe wholeheartedly that for you right now today, God will show up for you. But you got to get on your knees. You got to stop relying on your own abilities. Hezekiah had nothing to offer. To be fair, I have nothing to offer to God that can turn his mind. That anything that I can offer that is going to help God in his plan, all I can offer is myself. If God can show up for Hezekiah in a supernatural way, God can show up for you. And I think that is the really cool part about understanding that this is not just a story, but an event, because if God did it once, he can do it again. So if you're going through something today, maybe you are, maybe you're doing just fine, but maybe you're not. And maybe you've exhausted your resources. Maybe you've exhausted all the ways that you can think of to make things better. Maybe you've exhausted the ways of making yourself feel like today is okay. Maybe you're exhausted and you're just done. And you're feeling like, I got nothing left in the tank. I have nothing left to offer. I have nothing else to do. Oh, jeez. But what if that is where you need to be? If Hezekiah had all of his might, all of his gold, would he have done what other kings did? Other kings paid Egypt to help them. Egypt, if you help me, I'll give you all this gold. If you just attack the Assyrians, we'll attack them together, we'll win. That didn't work. And so, church, the encouragement of reading this, if I can give it to you today, I'm going to repeat it again and again. If it happened as a real event for Hezekiah back in 701 BCE, then God can show up today in 2026 for you. And that's the kind of the faith, right? We have the evidence. We know God can do it, but we need to have the faith that God will show up. And so whatever you're going through, church, I hope that this is something to build you up. Something to give you encouragement, something to drive you to go, God, okay, you can take over this because it really happened. And so I'm going to leave you with 4 words, and I'm going to pray. I don't have this on here. 4 words for you, Seth. This is simple. You can write it down if you want. It's going to be mind-blowing. This is going to change your week. God will show up. 4 words I'm leaving. I want to pray with you as we go. The worship team can come up. God, I thank you that we have the Bible. I thank you that it is full